The golden envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, heavy with the kind of expensive paper that whispers of old money and older secrets. The Whitmore Foundation cordially invites you to our annual Humanitarian Awards Gala, it read in elegant script, honoring those who have made extraordinary contributions to social justice and human dignity. My name was handwritten at the bottom in flowing calligraphy. Dr. Amara Okafor, recipient of the 2024 Courage and Advocacy Award. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, my coffee growing cold as I processed what I was seeing. 6 months ago, these same people had tried to destroy my career when I'd exposed their foundation's ties to private prison corporations. 6 months ago, their lawyers had sent cease and desist letters. Their board members had pressured my university to revoke my tenure. Their media allies had run hit pieces, questioning my research methodology and personal integrity. Now they wanted to give me an award. "It's a trap," said my research assistant, Maya Chen, when I showed her the invitation. She was 25, brilliant, and possessed of the kind of cynicism that comes from watching too many idealists get crushed by institutional power. They're trying to rehabilitate their image by associating with you. Classic reputation laundering. Or, I said, turning the invitation over in my hands, they're trying to neutralize me. Nothing silences a critic quite like making them part of the establishment they've been fighting. The Whitmore Foundation had been the subject of my doctoral dissertation and subsequent book, The Charity Industrial Complex: How Philanthropic Organizations Perpetuate the Systems They Claim to Fight. My research had revealed a network of connections between major charitable foundations and the very industries that created the problems they purported to solve. Private prisons funded by foundations that claimed to support criminal justice reform. Environmental groups backed by oil companies, poverty alleviation programs run by organizations that invested in predatory lending. The Whitmore Foundation had been the crown jewel of my investigation. Founded by tech billionaire Harrison Whitmore, it claimed to focus on breaking cycles of systemic oppression while simultaneously investing its profit endowment in companies that profited from mass incarceration, environmental destruction, and economic inequality. When I'd published my findings, the Foundation's response had been swift and vicious, a coordinated campaign to discredit my work and destroy my reputation. But something had changed in the months since my book's publication. Public pressure had mounted, investigative journalists had picked up the story, and several major donors had withdrawn their support. The Foundation's board had been forced to divest from the most obviously problematic investments. And Harrison Whitmore himself had stepped down as chairman, citing health concerns that everyone knew were really legal concerns. "You're not seriously considering going," Maya said, her voice rising with disbelief. "Actually, I am." I set the invitation down on my desk, next to a stack of research papers about the latest Foundation scandal I was investigating, but not for the reason they think. "Amara, this is professional suicide. The moment you accept that award, you become complicit in their rehabilitation campaign. You legitimize everything they've done." "Or," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind, "I use their platform to tell the truth they don't want told." Maya stared at me for a long moment, then slowly began to smile. "You're going to accept the award and then use your acceptance speech to expose them." The thought had occurred to me, that's either brilliant or insane. Sometimes there's not much difference. 3 weeks later, I stood in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, surrounded by 500 of the city's most powerful and influential people. The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. The air thick with expensive perfume and even more expensive wine. Waiters glided between tables carrying champagne and canapes that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, while a string quartet played classical music that provided the perfect soundtrack for conversations about tax shelters and vacation homes. I had chosen my outfit, Cathelia's simple black dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace and the kind of understated jewelry that suggested substance over flash. I wanted to look like I belonged here, at least on the surface, while carrying the research that would prove I absolutely did not. Dr. Okafor, Harrison Whitmore himself approached me, his smile warm and his handshake firm. He was smaller than I'd expected, with silver hair and kind eyes that made it easy to understand how he'd convinced so many people to trust him with their money and their consciences. "I'm so delighted you could join us tonight. When the board suggested honoring your work, I knew it was exactly the kind of recognition our foundation should be supporting. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Though I have to admit, I was surprised by the invitation, given our history." His laugh was practiced, diplomatic. "Water under the bridge, my dear, we may have disagreed about methodology, but we've always shared the same goals, making the world a more just and equitable place. Tonight is about celebrating that shared commitment." I nodded politely, even as my mind cataloged the lies embedded in his seemingly gracious words. Shared goals, shared commitment. As if exposing corruption and perpetuating it were somehow equivalent moral positions. "I understand you'll be speaking tonight," he continued. "I'm very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the future of philanthropic accountability. I think you'll find my remarks illuminating." Something flickered across his expression in certainty, perhaps, or the first hint of suspicion. But his smile never wavered. "Wonderful. Well, I should let you enjoy the evening. The ceremony begins in an hour." As he moved away, I felt a hand on my elbow. I turned to find Rebecca Martinez, an investigative journalist who had covered my research extensively and become something of an ally in the process. "Amara, what the hell are you doing here?" she whispered urgently. "Do you have any idea how this looks? The foundation's PR team has been promoting your attendance for weeks. They're using you to prove they've reformed, that they're open to criticism and willing to honor their critics." "I know exactly how it looks," I said calmly. "The question is whether you'll be here to cover what happens next." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're planning something." "I'm planning to tell the truth. Whether that constitutes something depends on how allergic this crowd is to honesty. Amara, they'll destroy you. These people have resources, connections, influence. They already tried to destroy me," I reminded her. "It didn't work then, and it won't work now. The difference is that tonight, they've given me a microphone and an audience of 500 people, including you and every other journalist in the city." Rebecca stared at me for a moment, then pulled out her phone. "I need to call my editor. If you're about to blow up the biggest charity gala of the year, I want cameras rolling." As she hurried away, I made my way through the crowd, observing the careful choreography of high society. Board members clustered around major donors, their conversations a delicate dance of flattery and fundraising. Politicians posed for photos with philanthropists, their smiles bright and their handshakes firm. Everyone was performing their role in the theater of charitable giving, playing their part in the illusion that writing checks was equivalent to creating change. I recognized many faces from my research CEOs whose companies had been exposed in my book, board members who had voted to maintain problematic investments, donors who had threatened to withdraw funding when my findings became public. They nodded politely as I passed, their expressions carefully neutral, as if we were meeting for the first time rather than continuing a battle that had been raging for months. Dr. Okafor, a young woman, approached me, her press badge identifying her as Sarah Kim from the City Tribune. "Could I ask you a few questions about tonight's award? Many people are surprised to see you here, given your previous criticism of the foundation." "I'm surprised to be here myself," I said honestly. "But sometimes the most important conversations happen in unexpected places." "Are you planning to address those criticisms in your acceptance speech?" I smiled, feeling the weight of the research folder in my purse documents. I'd spent weeks compiling evidence that would make my previous expos look like a gentle suggestion. "I'm planning to address a lot of things in my speech. I think the audience will find it very educational." Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that comes from sensing a major story. "Can you give me a preview? Let's just say that some invitations come with strings attached, and tonight I'm going to show everyone exactly who's been pulling them." As Sarah hurried away to alert her editors, I felt a familiar mix of anticipation and dread settling in my stomach. In 30 minutes, I would walk onto that stage and either vindicate everything I'd worked for or destroy my career in the most public way possible. The foundation's leaders thought they were neutralizing a threat by honoring me. Instead, they had given me the perfect opportunity to expose the truth they'd been trying so hard to hide. The wine in my glass caught the light from the chandeliers, casting ruby reflections across the white tablecloth. Around me, the gala continued its elegant progression toward the moment when everything would change. The foundation had invited me here for their own purposes, but I had accepted for mine. In 29 minutes, they would discover the difference. I excused myself from the increasingly crowded ballroom and found refuge in the hotel's library, a quiet space lined with leather-bound volumes that no one at the gala would ever read. Through the tall windows, I could see the city stretching out below, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there were the communities affected by the foundation's investments, families torn apart by mass incarceration, neighborhoods poisoned by environmental degradation, workers trapped in cycles of predatory lending. They weren't here tonight. They never were. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Just saw the livestream announcement. They're promoting your speech as a landmark moment in philanthropic accountability. The irony is killing me. I smiled despite my nerves. The foundation's marketing team had been working overtime to frame tonight as evidence of their commitment to transparency and reform. Press releases had gone out to major media outlets. Social media campaigns had highlighted my attendance, and the live stream of the ceremony was being promoted as a must-watch event for anyone interested in the future of charitable giving. They had no idea what they were about to broadcast to the world. Dr. Okafor, a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Margaret Whitmore, Harrison's wife and the foundation's current board chair, standing in the doorway. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of understated jewelry that costs more than most people's cars. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a calculating intelligence that reminded me why she'd been so successful in business before turning to philanthropy. Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for the invitation. It was ... unexpected. Please, call me Margaret. She moved into the library, closing the door behind her with a soft click. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted a moment to speak with you privately before the ceremony. Of course, Margaret walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. You know, when the board first suggested honoring you, I was ... resistant. Your book caused us considerable difficulty, and I won't pretend otherwise. But Harrison convinced me that this was an opportunity for healing, for moving forward together rather than remaining adversaries. And what do you think now? Now I think Harrison may have been naive. Margaret turned from the window, her expression serious. I've done my research on you, Dr. Okafor. You're not someone who forgives easily or forgets quickly. You're here for a reason, and I doubt it's to accept our award graciously and move on with your life. I studied her face, seeing a shrewdness that her husband lacked. Margaret Whitmore hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being naive about human nature or trusting in people's better angels. You're right, I said simply. I'm not here to be gracious. Then why are you here? Because you invited me. Because you gave me a platform and an audience, and the perfect opportunity to tell the truth about what your foundation really does. Margaret's smile was thin and cold. And what truth is that? I pulled out my phone, showing her the research folder I'd uploaded to the cloud, hundreds of pages of financial documents, investment records, and correspondence that painted a damning picture of the foundation's continued complicity in the systems it claimed to oppose. The truth that your divestment from private prison corporations was purely cosmetic. You sold your direct holdings but maintained investments in the banks that finance prison construction and the companies that provide prison services. The truth that your environmental grants go to organizations that focus on individual behavior change while ignoring the corporate polluters you're invested in. The truth that your poverty alleviation programs are funded by profits from predatory lending practices. Margaret's composure never wavered, but I saw her hands tighten slightly on her clutch purse. Those are serious allegations. They're documented facts. Every transaction, every investment decision, every board vote. I have 6 months of additional research that makes my book look like a rough draft, and you plan to share this research tonight. In your acceptance speech, I plan to share it with the world. Your livestream will reach millions of people, and every journalist in the city is here to cover what they think will be a feel-good story about reconciliation and reform. Instead, they're going to get the biggest exposé of philanthropic corruption in decades. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the city lights beyond the window. When she spoke, her voice was calm but edged with steel. You realize, of course, that we could simply cancel your speech. Technical difficulties, scheduling conflicts, any number of reasons. You could try, but Rebecca Martinez from the Tribune is here, along with reporters from every major outlet in the city. If you suddenly cancel the speech of your honored guest, they'll want to know why, and I'll be happy to tell them. We could revoke the award entirely, claim we discovered irregularities in your research, questions about your methodology. Again, you could try, but my research has been peer-reviewed and independently verified. Any attempt to discredit it now would only draw more attention to the findings. Margaret turned back to me, her expression a mixture of admiration and frustration. You've thought this through very carefully. I've had 6 months to plan. 6 months of watching you use my research to claim you've reformed, while continuing the same practices under different names. 6 months of seeing you rehabilitate your reputation while the communities you're harming continue to suffer. And you think destroying us tonight will help those communities? I think exposing the truth will help people make informed decisions about where to direct their charitable giving. I think transparency will force real accountability instead of the performative accountability you've been practicing. Margaret walked to one of the leather chairs and sat down, her movements graceful despite the tension in the room. You know, Dr. Okafor, I've spent my entire career building institutions, creating systems, establishing legacies. It's taken decades to construct what we have here through relationships. The trust, the influence that allows us to direct hundreds of millions of dollars toward charitable causes that serve your interests more than the people you claim to help. Perhaps, but even flawed charity is better than no charity at all. If you destroy the foundation tonight, if you make it impossible for us to continue operating, what happens to the programs we do fund? What happens to the organizations that depend on our grants? The communities that benefit from our investments? It was a sophisticated argument, the kind of moral complexity that made reform so difficult. The foundation did fund legitimate programs alongside its problematic investments. Real people would be hurt if it collapsed entirely. That's exactly the kind of thinking that allows corruption to flourish, I said. The idea that we should accept flawed systems because dismantling them might cause short-term harm. But what about the long-term harm of allowing those systems to continue? What about the communities that are being actively damaged by your investments while you congratulate yourselves for your charitable giving? Margaret nodded slowly. You're not wrong. But you're also not considering the full picture. Change is possible within existing systems. Reform can happen gradually, without the destruction that comes from total exposure. I tried gradual reform. I published my research. I engaged with your board. I gave you every opportunity to make meaningful changes. Instead, you tried to destroy my career, and then, when that failed, you invited me here to legitimize your cosmetic reforms, and now you're going to destroy us in return. I'm going to tell the truth. What happens after that is up to you. Margaret stood and walked back to the window, her reflection merging with the city lights in a way that made her seem insubstantial, ghost-like. You know, there's something almost admirable about your certainty. You see the world in such clear terms: good and evil, truth and lies, justice and corruption. I envy that clarity. It's not about certainty. It's about accountability. Is it? Or is it about revenge? About punishing us for trying to silence you? The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Was this about justice, or was it about proving that I couldn't be bought, silenced, or co-opted? Was I exposing the truth to help communities or to vindicate my own sense of righteousness? Maybe it's both, I said honestly. Maybe the desire for justice and the desire for vindication aren't mutually exclusive. Margaret smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. At least you're honest about your motivations. That's more than most people in your position would admit. A soft knock on the library door interrupted our conversation. A young man in a hotel uniform peered in apologetically. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore. They're ready to begin the ceremony. Dr. Okafor, you're needed backstage for the award presentation." Margaret gathered her purse and moved toward the door, pausing to look back at me one final time. "You know, Dr. Okafor, regardless of what happens tonight, I want you to know that I respect what you're trying to do, even if I disagree with your methods. And I want you to know that I don't take any pleasure in what I'm about to do. But some truths are too important to keep silent. Indeed they are." Margaret's smile was sad, but not bitter. "I suppose we'll both find out tonight whether the truth really does set people free, or whether it just creates a different kind of prison." As she left the library, I was alone with my thoughts and my research, and the weight of what I was about to do. In 15 minutes, I would walk onto that stage and either vindicate everything I'd worked for or destroy my career in the most public way possible. But as I looked out at the city lights, thinking about the communities affected by the foundation's investments, I knew I didn't really have a choice. The invitation had been a trap, but not the kind they'd intended. They'd given me exactly what I needed to expose the truth they'd been trying so hard to hide. The silence in the library was profound, but it wouldn't last much longer. In a few minutes, the whole world would be listening. The backstage area buzzed with the controlled chaos of a major event. Sound technicians checked microphone levels, lighting designers adjusted spotlights, and event coordinators spoke in urgent whispers into their headsets. I stood in the wings, watching the ceremony unfold on a monitor, my acceptance speech folded in my jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. On stage, Harrison Whitmore was delivering his opening remarks to the assembled crowd. His voice carried clearly through the sound system, warm and confident as he spoke about the foundation's mission, its commitment to transparency, and its dedication to learning from past mistakes. "Tonight," he said, his image crisp on the backstage monitor, "we honor individuals who have challenged us to be better, who have held us accountable to our highest ideals, who have reminded us that true philanthropy requires not just generosity, but humility." The irony was almost overwhelming. He was describing exactly what I was about to do, while having no idea that I was about to do it. Dr. Okafor, a young woman with a clipboard and a headset, approached me. "I'm Sarah, the stage manager. You'll be introduced in about 10 minutes. Any questions about the presentation?" "Just one," I said. "How many people are watching the live stream?" Sarah checked her tablet. "Current viewership is at 2.3 million and climbing. The social media engagement is incredible. #Whitmore Gala is trending on 3 platforms. This is definitely our most watched event ever. 2.3 million people. The number was staggering, far beyond what I'd expected when I'd planned this moment. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would be witnessed by more people than had read my book. More people than had seen any of my previous research, more people than I'd ever imagined reaching with my work." "Dr. Okafor," another voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Rebecca Martinez, the investigative journalist who had covered my research extensively. She looked excited and nervous in equal measure. "I wanted to let you know, we've got cameras positioned throughout the ballroom, and my editor has cleared the front page for whatever story comes out of tonight." "Are you really going to do this?" "I'm really going to do this." "Do you have any idea what you're walking into?" "The foundation's legal team is here, their PR people are monitoring social media in real time, and there are board members from a dozen other major foundations in that audience. If you expose them tonight, the entire philanthropic establishment will come after you. They already came after me once. I'm still here." Rebecca smiled grimly. "This is different. This is public, this is recorded, this is permanent. There's no walking this back." Good, some truths shouldn't be walked back on the monitor. I could see Harrison finishing his introduction of the evening's honorees. There were 4 of us being recognized: a civil rights lawyer, an environmental activist, a public health researcher, and me. The others had already given their speeches, gracious and inspiring talks about the importance of collaboration between activists and philanthropists. I was the final speaker, the climax of the evening's program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice boomed through the sound system. "Our final honoree tonight is someone who has challenged all of us to examine our practices more critically, to hold ourselves to higher standards, and to remember that true accountability requires courage. Dr. Amara Oak, recipient of the 2024 Courage and Advocacy Award." The applause was polite but warm as I walked onto the stage, the lights bright enough to make the audience beyond the first few rows invisible. I could see Harrison's smile, Margaret's carefully neutral expression, and the faces of board members and donors who had no idea what was coming. The podium felt solid under my hands as I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that darkness were the journalists who would carry this story to the world, the social media influencers who would amplify its reach, the foundation staff who would have to deal with the aftermath. "Thank you, Harrison, and thank you to the Whitmore Foundation for this unexpected honor," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I received the invitation to tonight's gala, I was surprised. After all, 6 months ago, this same foundation was trying to destroy my career for exposing their investments in private prison corporations. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the gracious acceptance speech they'd been expecting. But then I realized why I'd been invited. The foundation needed to rehabilitate its image after my research revealed the contradictions between their stated mission and their actual investments. What better way to prove they'd reformed than to honor the very person who had exposed them? The murmur grew louder. I could see Harrison's smile faltering, Margaret's expression growing tense, board members beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. So I accepted the invitation, not because I believed in their reformation, but because I wanted to share some additional research I've been conducting. Research that reveals the foundation's divestment from private prisons was purely cosmetic, a shell game designed to maintain the appearance of reform while continuing the same practices under different names. The audience was no longer murmuring. A shocked silence had fallen over the ballroom, broken only by the sound of cameras clicking and phones being raised to record what was happening. I pulled out my prepared remarks, but I didn't need to look at them. I'd memorized every fact, every figure, every damning detail. In the 6 months since my book was published, the Whitmore Foundation has divested from 3 private prison corporations while increasing their investments. In the banks that finance prison construction, the companies that provide prison services, and the firms that profit from immigrant detention. They've maintained their financial stake in mass incarceration while claiming to support criminal justice reform. Harrison was on his feet now, moving toward the stage with an expression of barely controlled panic. But I wasn't finished. Their environmental grants go to organizations that focus on individual behavior change, telling people to use less plastic and drive less, while the foundation maintains investments in the oil companies and chemical manufacturers that are the primary drivers of environmental destruction. They fund poverty alleviation programs with profits from predatory lending practices that trap families in cycles of debt. Security guards were moving through the audience now, but they seemed uncertain about what to do. I was an invited guest, an honored speaker, standing at their podium with their microphone, speaking to their livestream audience of 2.3 million people. The foundation's latest tax filings show that 72% of their budget goes to administrative costs, celebrities, office space, gala expenses like tonight's event. Less than 30% actually reaches the communities they claim to serve. They spend more money on public relations than they do on public good. Margaret Whitmore was speaking urgently into her phone, probably trying to cut the live stream feed. But it was too late. The story was already spreading across social media, being shared and reshared by viewers who were watching the philanthropic establishment being exposed in real time. I found out why they invited me. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. It wasn't to honor my work or acknowledge their mistakes. It was to neutralize me, to make me complicit in their rehabilitation campaign, to transform a critic into a collaborator. They thought they could buy my silence with their award and their applause. The ballroom was in chaos now. Some audience members were heading for the exits, others were recording everything on their phones, and still others sat in stunned silence as the evening's careful choreography collapsed around them. But here's what they didn't understand, I said, looking directly at Harrison, who had stopped his advance toward the stage and was staring at me with a mixture of horror and admiration. You can't co-opt someone who has nothing to lose. You can't silence someone who values truth more than reputation. And you can't buy someone who understands that some things aren't for sale. I pulled out a flash drive and held it up for the cameras to see. This contains 6 months of additional research, financial documents, investment records, board meeting minutes, correspondence between foundation leadership and the corporations they're invested in. Everything I've shared tonight and much more. It's being uploaded to WikiLeaks as I speak, and copies are being sent to every major news outlet in the country. The silence that followed was deafening. 500 of the most powerful people in the city sat in stunned quiet, processing the implications of what they'd just witnessed. The livestream audience had grown to over 4 million viewers, and the hashtag #WhitmoreExposed was trending worldwide. The Whitmore Foundation invited me here to legitimize their fake reformation, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. Instead, I'm using their platform to expose the truth they've been trying so hard to hide. Thank you for the award, thank you for the audience, and thank you for proving that sometimes the best way to fight corruption is to accept its invitation to dinner. I set the microphone back in its stand and walked off the stage, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked faces and a live stream audience that was about to reshape the conversation about philanthropic accountability forever. As I reached the wings, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me, shouted questions from journalists, urgent conversations between board members, the sound of chairs scraping as people rushed to respond to what they'd just witnessed. But I felt calm for the first time in months. The truth was out, the evidence was public, and the foundation's carefully constructed facade had crumbled in front of millions of witnesses. They had invited me to be honored. Instead, I had honored the communities they'd been betraying, the principles they'd been violating, and the truth they'd been trying to suppress. The invitation had been a trap, but not the kind they'd intended. And now the whole world would know exactly what the Whitmore Foundation really stood for. The hotel's security office had become an impromptu war room filled with foundation board members, legal advisors, and public relations specialists, all speaking in urgent, overlapping voices. Through the glass walls, I could see the chaos continuing in the ballroom, journalists conducting interviews, donors demanding explanations, and staff members trying to manage a crisis that was spiraling far beyond their control. I sat in a chair facing Margaret Whitmore, who had somehow maintained her composure despite watching her foundation's reputation implode on live television. Her lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, was scrolling through his phone with increasing agitation. "The story is everywhere," he reported grimly. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, BBC, Reuters. The hashtag is trending in 12 countries. And the document dump, he looked up at me with something approaching respect. "It's comprehensive. Financial records going back 5 years, internal emails, board meeting transcripts. This isn't just an expose, it's a complete evisceration." "Dr. Okafor," Margaret said quietly, "I have to ask, what do you hope to accomplish with this? You've destroyed the foundation, yes, but you've also eliminated one of the largest sources of charitable funding in the region. The organizations that depend on our grants, the programs that serve vulnerable communities, they'll all suffer because of what you've done tonight." It was the same argument she'd made in the library, but now it carried the weight of immediate consequence. In the space of 20 minutes, I had transformed from honored guest to public enemy. From award recipient to institutional destroyer. You're right, I said. Some good programs will lose funding, some legitimate organizations will struggle, but how many more communities will be protected from the harm your investments were causing? How many people will be freed from predatory lending practices? How many families will be spared the trauma of mass incarceration? You don't know, the lawyer interjected. You can't quantify the harm you've prevented any more than we can quantify the good we've done. You've made a moral calculation based on incomplete information. No, I said firmly. I've made a moral calculation based on the best information available, and that information shows that the Whitmore Foundation was causing more harm than good, using charitable giving as a cover for profitable investments in human suffering. Harrison Whitmore entered the security office, his face pale and his usually perfect composure completely shattered. He looked like a man who had just watched his life's work crumble in real time. The phones are ringing off the hook, he said, slumping into a chair. Donors pulling funding, partner organizations demanding explanations, board members from other foundations distancing themselves from us. 30 years of building relationships gone in 20 minutes. Harrison Margaret began, but he held up a hand to stop her. No, she's right, he said, looking directly at me. Dr. Okafor is absolutely right. We lost our way somewhere along the line. We started caring more about maintaining our influence than using it responsibly. We became exactly the kind of institution we originally set out to reform. The admission hung in the air like a confession, raw and unexpected. His lawyer looked horrified, probably calculating the legal implications of such a public acknowledgement. The worst part, Harrison continued, is that we knew, deep down, we all knew, every time we approved an investment that contradicted our mission. Every time we chose profit over principle, we told ourselves it was necessary for the greater good. But it wasn't. It was just easier than doing the right thing. Margaret reached across the table and took her husband's hand. Harrison, you don't have to do. He looked around the room, taking in the lawyers and PR specialists and board members who had spent years helping him build and maintain the foundation's reputation. We all do. Dr. Okafor didn't destroy the Whitmore Foundation tonight. She exposed what we had already become, a monument to our own virtue, rather than a force for actual change. Through the glass walls, I could see Rebecca Martinez conducting a live television interview, her expression animated as she explained the significance of what had just happened. Other journalists were setting up cameras throughout the hotel, turning the elegant space into a newsroom focused on the biggest philanthropy scandal in decades. So what happens now? I asked. Now we face the consequences, Margaret said. Legal investigations, regulatory scrutiny, the complete collapse of our credibility. The foundation will probably have to dissolve within the year. And the money, the endowment. Harrison and Margaret exchanged a look that suggested they'd already been discussing this possibility. $3 billion, Harrison said quietly. If we liquidate everything and distribute it properly, it could fund legitimate community organizations for decades. No administrative overhead, no investment conflicts, no institutional self-interest, just direct support for the people who actually need it. You'd do that. Give up control of the foundation entirely. What choice do we have? Margaret asked. You've made it impossible for us to continue operating as we have been. We can either fight a losing battle to rehabilitate our reputation, or we can accept that this is an opportunity to do something genuinely transformative. The lawyer looked up from his phone with an expression of barely controlled panic. The SEC is opening an investigation into the foundation's investment practices. The IRS is reviewing your tax-exempt status. And there are already 3 class action lawsuits being filed by investors who claim they were misled about the foundation's ethical standards. Good, Harrison said, surprising everyone in the room. Maybe external oversight will accomplish what internal accountability couldn't. A knock on the security office door interrupted our conversation. A hotel staff member peered in nervously. Excuse me, but there are protesters gathering outside. They're calling for Dr. Okafor to address them. Through the window, I could see crowds gathering in the street below, carrying signs that read, "Truth over charity" and "Accountability now." The live stream of my speech had mobilized people across the city, drawing them to the hotel to demand answers and action. "They want to hear from you," Margaret said. "The communities you've been advocating for, the organizations that have been shut out of traditional philanthropy, the people who have been harmed by the systems we've been supporting. This is your moment." I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the crowd that had gathered in response to 20 minutes of truth-telling. These were the people the foundation claimed to serve, but had actually been exploiting low-income families, communities of color, immigrants, formerly incarcerated individuals. They had come here not to celebrate charity, but to demand justice. Dr. Okafor Harrison said quietly, "I want you to know that despite everything that's happened tonight, I'm grateful. You've given us a chance to become what we always claimed to be. It won't be easy, and it won't be comfortable, but it will be honest." "What about you?" I asked. "What will you do now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "For 30 years, my identity has been tied to this foundation. Without it, I'm not sure who I am or what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life." "Maybe that's the point," I suggested. "Maybe it's time to find out who you are when you're not hiding behind institutional power and charitable tax deductions." Margaret smiled sadly. "You know, when we first started the foundation, we had such grand ambitions. We were going to solve poverty, end injustice, create a more equitable world. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that real change requires real sacrifice, not just strategic giving." "It's not too late," I said. "The foundation may be finished, but the work doesn't have to be. There are community organizations that have been doing this work for decades without recognition or adequate funding. Maybe it's time to follow their lead instead of trying to lead them." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Dr. Okafor, I have to advise you that there may be legal consequences for what you've done tonight. Breach of contract, defamation, corporate espionage. The foundation's board could pursue multiple avenues of litigation." "Let them try," I said. "Everything I shared tonight is documented and verifiable. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and exposing corruption is a public service, not a crime." "The court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict," Margaret observed, gesturing toward the crowds outside. "Any attempt to silence Dr. Okafor now would only prove her point about institutional power being used to suppress accountability." Harrison stood and extended his hand to me. "Dr. Okafor, I want to apologize, not just for tonight, but for everything that led to tonight. You gave us multiple opportunities to reform, to address the contradictions in our mission, to become the organization we claim to be. Instead, we tried to destroy you for telling the truth." I shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "Apology accepted. But the real test isn't whether you're Saritz, whether you're willing to do the IH work of making things right." "We are," Margaret said firmly. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're committed to ensuring that the foundation's resources reach the communities that need them most, without the institutional self-interest that has corrupted our mission." As I prepared to leave the security office and address the crowd outside, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been an academic researcher trying to expose corruption through traditional channels. Tonight, I had become something else entirely, a catalyst for transformation. A voice for communities that had been silenced, a reminder that some truths are too important to keep quiet. The invitation to the gala had been intended as a trap, a way to neutralize my criticism and legitimize the foundation's superficial reforms. Instead, it had become the platform for the most comprehensive exposé of philanthropic corruption in recent memory. As I walked toward the hotel's exit, past journalists and protesters and foundation staff members whose world had just been turned upside down, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the naive hope that change would be easy, but the hard-earned hope that comes from knowing the truth has finally been told and that people are ready to act on it. The crowd outside was waiting, and they deserved to hear what came next. The foundation was finished, but the movement for authentic philanthropy was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the community center where it all began, watching children from the neighborhood create art with supplies purchased from the Whitmore Foundation's liquidation fund. The irony wasn't lost on my money that had once been invested in systems of oppression was now directly supporting the communities those systems had harmed. The transformation hadn't been easy or clean. The foundation's collapse had sent shockwaves through the philanthropic world, triggering investigations, reforms, and soul-searching across the sector. Some good programs had indeed lost funding, at least temporarily, but something more important had emerged from the chaos. A new model of community-controlled philanthropy that put power directly in the hands of the people being served. Dr. Okafor, a young voice, interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Marcus, a 12-year-old whose family had been affected by the predatory lending practices the foundation had once profited from. He was holding a painting he'd just finished, a vibrant depiction of his neighborhood, but with the payday loan shops and check cashing stores replaced by community gardens and art studios. "This is beautiful, Marcus," I said, studying the careful detail he'd put into reimagining his world. "What inspired it?" "My mom says you helped make it so the bad companies can't hurt families like ours anymore," he said matter-of-factly. "So I painted what our neighborhood could look like if we got to decide what goes in it." The simplicity of his understanding cut straight to the heart of what the past 6 months had been about. Not just exposing corruption, but creating space for communities to envision and build their own solutions. "Dr. Okafor," another voice called my name. I looked up to see Rebecca Martinez approaching with a camera crew in tow. She'd won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage of the foundation scandal, but more importantly, she'd used her platform to amplify the voices of community leaders who had been working for change long before my speech made headlines. "Rebecca, what brings you here today?" Follow-up story on the community-controlled fund distribution. The numbers are remarkable. 97% of the money is going directly to programs and services, with only 3% for administrative costs. It's the inverse of what the foundation was doing. She gestured to the bustling activity around us. Children working on art projects, teenagers learning job skills, adults attending financial literacy classes, seniors sharing stories and wisdom. All of it funded by money that had once been locked away in an endowment designed more to preserve wealth than distribute it. "How does it feel?" Rebecca asked, "to see your research translated into this kind of direct action?" "Humbling," I said honestly. "The research was just the beginning. The real work has been done by community leaders who understood these problems long before I started investigating them, and who knew how to create solutions once the resources became available." Through the center's windows, I could see Harrison and Margaret Whitmore working in the community garden they'd helped establish with their personal funds. The legal consequences of the foundation's collapse had been fines, investigations, the complete loss of their social standing in philanthropic circles. But they'd chosen to stay in the city to do the unglamorous work of community service without recognition or institutional power. "Have you spoken with the Whitmores recently?" Rebecca asked, following my gaze. "Occasionally, they're different people than they were 6 months ago. Losing everything they thought defined them forced them to discover who they actually are underneath all the institutional identity. And who are they? People who genuinely want to help, but who had forgotten how to do it without maintaining control. They're learning to follow rather than lead, to listen rather than direct, to serve rather than manage." A commotion near the center's entrance drew our attention. A group of young activists was arriving for a strategy meeting about expanding the community-controlled funding model to other cities. The Whitmore scandal had inspired similar investigations across the country, revealing a pattern of philanthropic institutions that served their own interests more than their stated missions. "The ripple effects keep spreading," Rebecca observed. "Foundations in Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, they're all facing increased scrutiny. Demands for transparency, pressure to democratize their decision-making processes." "Good," I said. "Charity should be uncomfortable for the giver and empowering for the receiver." When it becomes comfortable for institutions and disempowering for communities, it stopped being charity and becomes something else entirely. Maya Chen, my former research assistant, who now directed the Community Fund's accountability oversight, approached with a tablet full of data and a smile that suggested good news. "The quarterly reports are in," she announced. 67 community organizations funded, over 12,000 people directly served, and a 340% increase in community-controlled assets compared to the foundation's final year. Plus, we've got requests from foundations in 8 other cities asking for guidance on transitioning to community-controlled models. Any resistance from traditional philanthropic institutions? Some, Maya admitted. But the public pressure is enormous. After what happened here, donors are asking harder questions about where their money goes and who controls it. Foundations are having to choose between transparency and As the afternoon wore on, I found myself in conversation with Maria Santos, a community leader who had been fighting for neighborhood investment long before the Whitmore scandal made headlines. She was one of the people who had taught me that research without community partnership was just academic exercise. "You know," Maria said, watching children play in the renovated space that had once been a predatory lending office, "when you gave that speech 6 months ago, I wasn't sure if it would change anything. Rich people have been promising to do better for as long as I can remember. What's different this time? The money isn't controlled by rich people anymore," she said simply. "It's controlled by us. We decide what our communities need. We choose which programs to fund. We measure success by our standards instead of theirs. Are you worried about sustainability? About what happens when the foundation money runs out?" Maria smiled. "That's the beautiful thing about community-controlled resources. They don't run out the same way institutional money does. When people control their own funding, they find ways to make it grow, to leverage it for additional resources, to build lasting capacity instead of just temporary programs." As evening approached and the center began to quiet down, I walked through the neighborhood that had become the testing ground for a new model of philanthropy. The changes were visible everywhere: vacant lots transformed into community gardens, abandoned buildings converted into cooperative businesses, streets that had once been lined with predatory businesses now hosting farmers markets and cultural events. But the deeper changes were less visible and more profound. The community had developed its own systems of mutual aid, its own networks of support, its own vision of what prosperity could look like when it wasn't defined by external institutions. My phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Whitmore. "Saw the news coverage of today's event. Proud of what you've all built? Still learning how to be useful without being in charge?" I smiled at the message. 6 months ago, Harrison had been one of the most powerful philanthropists in the country, controlling billions of dollars and commanding respect from politicians and business leaders. Now, he was learning to compost, to plant vegetables, to listen to community members without trying to solve their problems for them. Dr. Okafor Marcus appeared at my side again, this time carrying a folder full of drawings. "I made these for you. They're pictures of all the things that are better now because you told the truth." I opened the folder to find a series of drawings depicting the neighborhood's transformation, the community center bustling with activity, the garden where the Whitmores worked alongside residents, the cooperative businesses that had replaced predatory ones, the children playing safely in spaces that had once been dangerous. "These are incredible. Marcus, thank you. My mom says truth-telling is the most important job in the world," he said seriously. "Because you can't fix problems if you don't know what they really are." As I walked home through the transformed neighborhood, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. The invitation to the Whitmore Gala had been intended as a trap, a way to neutralize my criticism and co-opt my research. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most significant transformation of philanthropic practice in decades. The foundation was gone, but something better had taken its place: a model of community-controlled resources that put power where it belonged, in the hands of the people most affected by the decisions being made. It wasn't perfect, And it wasn't easy, but it was honest in a way that institutional philanthropy had forgotten how to be. My phone rang as I reached my apartment. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Dr. Okafor, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Seattle Community Foundation. I know this might sound strange, but we're facing some of the same issues you exposed in the Whitmore case. Our board is interested in transitioning to a community-controlled model, but we're not sure how to begin. Would you be willing to consult with us? I looked out my window at the neighborhood below, where lights were coming on in homes and businesses that had been transformed by the simple act of telling the truth about power and money and who really deserved to control both. I'd be happy to help, I said. But you should know that the process isn't just about changing funding structures. It's about fundamentally reimagining what philanthropy is supposed to accomplish and who it's supposed to serve. That's exactly what we're hoping for, Jennifer replied. We're tired of being part of the problem. We want to learn how to be part of the solution. As I hung up the phone and prepared for another round of research, investigation, and truth-telling, I thought about Marcus's painting of his reimagined neighborhood. The foundation had invited me to their gala to silence my criticism and legitimize their superficial reforms. Instead, they had given me the platform to expose their corruption and inspire a movement that was spreading across the country. Sometimes the most powerful invitations are the ones that reveal exactly why they should never have been extended in the first place.